Hello everybody, good evening, I'm Cosmic Claire and welcome to another one of my nightly videos. Here all wrapped up trying to get warm on a cold evening here in Headingley. Well now, there's a saying which I've always found quite interesting, and I'm going to talk about that tonight. And what the saying is that the devil's greatest success is to have persuaded people that he doesn't exist. And I think there's an awful lot of wisdom to be found in that, because it doesn't even really matter whether the devil as a metaphysical entity does exist or not, for that to be a interesting saying. And because of course the word devil could be transposed with any other word you could say. Well, for instance, one that often comes to mind is just kind of general psychopaths and evildoers and sociopaths. Of course, it's absolutely essential for them to have everybody believe that these kind of people are extremely rare, and certainly they are not amongst them. The persuasive, charming people who leave you wondering what happened, and it's about putting you into a mindset where you don't realise what is going on. You don't think that the things which some people might say could possibly be true. This is the whole psychology behind the use of the term conspiracy theories, to pass everything off as a theory, when of course the mainstream sham that is put across to us is also just a theory, because most of these things that they present to us as facts have little or no substance behind them. I mean, another one I'm thinking about which fits into this whole scenario is the banking con. This is something that's beginning to unravel, but which is so deeply embedded into the psyche of the Western mind particularly, and probably elsewhere. They've caught it, that banks' interest and debt are just the way things are, when in fact I've just been reading an interesting document off the UK column, which is a website I shall give the link for, called the Bradbury Pound. It's a PDF file, and it details how an interest-free government issue was made in 1914, called the Bradbury Pound note, because up until that point only large sums of £5 and above were made by promissory notes, because £5 was so much in those days. Only a wealthy person would be in a position to do that, whereas most people, they had sovereigns and half sovereigns were £1 and 10 shilling legal tender. And so when the First World War happened, there was a worry about a run on the banks, and so this pound note and 10 shilling note legal tender were issued, there was no panic. Nobody tried to change these notes into sovereigns. People trusted it, and it was only later that the banks persuaded the government to get into borrowing money from them and paying debt on it, and the whole thing kicked off, which is kind of interesting because the Federal Reserve Bank in America, which does pretty much the same thing, had just been instituted the previous December, after the infamous Jekyll Island meeting. And ever since then there's been a gradually encroaching system whereby these mostly autonomous privately run banks have got themselves into a position. Absolutely, really, if you understand what the position is, it's quite incredible. An independent bank has been formed by people who admittedly have a bit of money to start with. They then persuade the government that the government needs to borrow money from them at interest and allow them to have the right to print or even type just onto screens money for which they only have perhaps 1/10 collateral. So the moment they lend a bit of this money out, that is therefore collateral, and they're allowed to lend on the strength of that, and so on and so forth. And so it spirals out endlessly as a pyramid scheme. It is a Ponzi scheme, and there's a kind of growing awareness of the way that the banking system has used this to hijack the economic system of the Western world powers, the Eurozone countries like Greece and Spain. And well, there are legitimate things that governments can do to get themselves out of these debt situations, but I suppose I'm interested in just focusing for now on seeing through the illusions which are put forward, the hypnotic persuasion that these things are necessary, because it's all kind of done behind the scenes by people who arrange things without people out in the street really knowing what's going on. And then some kind of gloss or spin is put upon it, or it's shuffled off in some kind of sleight of hand so that people don't really know what's going on. It's such a big sort of passed off as such a big technical thing that it's all just kind of been sorted out. And by sleight of hand, the population, the world, the economy has thereby been taken over, and nobody even realises what it is that's going on. Now, this is actually going on everywhere. I'm thinking, bring it right up to date. Syria. There are so many contradictions and so many infiltrations and so on and so forth going on there that it's really, really difficult to form any particular opinion of it, but certainly the one opinion I would not form is the opinion that is trying to be foisted on us by the Western news media. You can be sure that the truth is probably something in the opposite direction. So I suppose one thing that comes to mind with this is something that J. Edgar Hoover said. Now, J. Edgar Hoover was director of the FBI in America for, I think it was 37 years or thereabouts. And he once said that the population was deceived by a conspiracy so vast that it beggared belief, or something to those, something to that effect. So what he's saying is that the deception is so big that people don't believe it's possible, because people don't have such a conception of such monstrously planned ill will and evil against people. People don't actually imagine that the people behind the banking system could actually plan what's going on at the moment. It's much more preferred to go down to the, oh yes, well, I prefer the screw up incompetence theory of history, which plays right into the devil has persuaded people he doesn't exist, because it's kind of like it's a psychologically conditioned blind spot. The people say, no, it's not possible, it's not possible, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, it's not possible. And all they are saying is that it is outside of their belief system. And where if people say, well, you know, I don't believe it's possible that people could steal, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars or even trillions of dollars. People could set up a criminal system which would defraud the entire world. Essentially, they're saying that they don't believe that somebody could be that evil and that greedy. And yet, we look at the world of war and we see the terrible atrocities which have taken place in Vietnam, the Congo, Rwanda, crumbs, the terrible things that American weapons do to people in the Middle East, the dreadful outcomes of depleted uranium and the mutant children that are born in Fallujah and all this stuff, and yet we're still sticking our fingers in our ears and saying, no, it's not intentional, it's not intentional. 9/11 was just a bunch of well-organised fanatics with box cutters. And it reminds me of a situation in the book Dune, whereby certain characters, I won't go into this in too much detail, but basically the idea is that certain characters have memories which need unlocking, and the only way that they can unlock it is by putting them through a severe stress. And this seems to be kind of the situation we're in at the moment, because the world elite is carrying off such a deception that it is kind of hard for people to believe it. And yet, eventually, when the shock is so bad, when things are completely intolerable, then people will have to see that these things are actually the case, that the banking corporations are riddled with corruption, and that they are behind the wars and the debt, slavery. But in some ways this is actually too big a thing for the world to kind of realise quickly. So it is happening very fast, and I'm kind of echoing something I heard Ron Van Dyke say the other night. But I believe he's right that if all of this stuff kind of came out overnight, well, it's not possible for it to, because the human psyche is too resistant to seeing everything change in one go. It has to do it kind of bit by bit, in bite-sized chunks, digest it, understand, and then go on to the next bit. And the mass collective mind at the moment is kind of being overwhelmed by all these deception after deception, corruption after corruption, and it's like putting dots onto a picture. Eventually there's more dots than there are original picture, and the picture starts getting blotted out, and suddenly you start seeing a new picture of the dots that overlaid on it. And I think that might be something we start seeing a little bit more of this year, folks, because the general accumulation of evidence is gradually becoming so much that even people who just kind of want to have a quiet life and don't want to stress themselves with all this stuff will have to realise this, because it is the effects of this are coming to everybody, and the only way to deal with it is to become aware of it, and to take on whatever local consequence or whatever local responsibility you can to basically make the world more conscious, because what this whole scenario I've been talking about today in a rather kind of bumbling and roundabout way is that it's all about keeping people in a kind of hazy unconsciousness, and just keep your eyes down, and we have to raise our eyes, we have to look up, and realise that there are things that are going on which are not that we would like them to be, and that just because they're not the way we would like them to be doesn't mean we should ignore them or deny them, or just try and wish them away, because they will get closer and closer. So it is very much about having the courage to look into the shadows and turn over the stones, and you might find some nasty scorpion or beetle underneath the stone, but the thing is, if you've exposed it and chased it away, then it's not going to surprise you. These things, if you're not aware of them, they'll surprise you. And so it's really important to be aware of what's going on in the shadows around you. Look into the shadows, penetrate, cast a bit of light into the shadows, and you'll either expose these things or they'll run away from you. Either way, you've cleared a bit of new ground and you've added a bit of consciousness to the world. And so I think that's kind of where I want to get to tonight, folks. Hope it's not been too rambling, and I hope I got somewhere in the end with it. So thank you for watching, and I'll be with you again tomorrow. Good evening in Lakesh. Interesting saying, and because of course the word devil could be transposed with any other word you could say. Well, for instance, one that often comes to mind is charming people who leave you wondering what happened, and it's about putting you into a mindset where you don't realise what is going on. You don't think that the things which some people might say could possibly about that tonight. And what the saying is that the devil's greatest success is to have persuaded people that he doesn't exist. And I think there's an awful lot of wisdom to be found in that, because it doesn't even really matter whether the devil as a metaphysical entity does exist or not for that to be a hello everybody, good evening, I'm Cosmic Claire, and welcome to another one of my nightly videos. Here all wrapped up, trying to keep warm on a cold evening here in Headingley. Well now, there's a saying which I've always found quite interesting, and I'm going to talk about just kind of general psychopaths and evildoers and sociopaths. Of course, it's absolutely essential for them to have everybody believe that these kind of people are extremely rare, and certainly they are not amongst them. The persuasive